First of all, I just want to say I'm really, really happy to be with all of you physical bodies in a physical space, reading all your emotions in physical languages. It feels amazing. It's a little overwhelming and also really wonderful. So when Michelle and I talked about this talk and the theme of the conference, we agreed that it would be maybe interesting to just talk about the career path, like what happened between being a design intern and becoming a chief product officer. How did that happen? And there were a lot of mechanics and all of that. There were a lot of decisions. There were a lot of, really tactical parts of that. And I'm not going to talk about any of those things. But I'm going to really leave time for Q&A at the end. So if you guys want to talk about money and bullshit and like horrible people and how did you and being a woman and a mother and anything like that that's real and tactical, I will answer anything and we can talk about anything. So now that you have notebooks from Allison, if you think of questions, just write them down and we will have that time because that's my favorite time at the end. But I did want to take you through the deeper experience of that path. Not so much how did one job turn into another, but what was going on during this whole process, right? And what informed it, and ultimately, what was at the root of what happened. So I'm going to talk to you about three things. I'm going to talk to you about light, growth, and roots. I'm going to use a lot of tree metaphors. I have a few advice slides. It's all labeled, so you're going to know what you're looking at. This is my actual jacket that I wear on the street and get a lot of very interesting comments about. But we're going to also end with how this jacket on the stage personifies all these things that my path has led me to. So let's go back to the beginning. It all started for me when I was 13 years old and I got my first sewing machine. And before then, I'd love to make things and draw and I felt that creative spirit for sure. But when I got that sewing machine, it was like nuts, like something clicked. I was just making shit all the time. I couldn't get enough. I wanted to learn how to make clothes, and I just made clothes constantly. So when I turned 17 or so, and we were supposed to be thinking about maybe going to university or college, because I grew up in a very academic family, I asked, okay, well, can I go to school to make clothes? Is this a thing? Nobody knew the answer to that. So then we did some research. We figured out, yes, there are apparel design programs, fashion design programs. Okay, what are these schools? Where are they? Okay, there are 4 or 5 schools. Parsons supposed to be really good. Well, okay, how do you get into Parsons? You need a drawing portfolio. How do I make a drawing portfolio? Oh, okay, there's a summer program. All right, I'm gonna figure out how to make a drawing portfolio. So I get into Parsons, I moved to New York, I grew up in Chicago. And here we find ourselves with our first tree metaphor, which is follow the light. Now, we're going to talk about trees for a minute because I'm obsessed with trees, as I think many of you might secretly or not secretly be. But trees, are constantly searching for light because they eat light, which is amazing and intriguing. But they do anything they need to get to that light. And that's how so much of this journey felt for me. All I wanted to do was make clothes. And I had to contort and move and find all these different ways of growing around all of these crazy things I came into contact with just to do the thing I wanted to do, the thing that fed me. And that was really true for the whole path. So I get to New York and I'm like, okay, I'm at school, I'm ready to make clothes. And it's the most stressful, intense, competitive environment. It's like, Devil Wears Prada, but 10 years before, and you're 17, and it's like, oh my God, who are these people? And why do I feel like I'm in med school when I just want to make clothes, And so after my second year, I left school. I was like, do I want to do this? I don't know. This is so intense. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I took some time off. I went home to Chicago. I moved back into my parents' house. I got a job paying minimum wage at a fabric warehouse, moving bolts of fabric around. And there was a textile art center in Chicago, and I learned how to weave, and I learned how to dye, and I learned how to knit. And during that year, I realized, you know what? Even though school is crazy, I really want to do this. I love doing this. So I'm just gonna figure out how to do it. So I moved back to New York. In the meantime, I was lucky enough to be in the dorms with musicians, writers, and artists because Parsons is part of a multi-school group at the new school. So I just kind of hung out with all of them. And I didn't hang out as much with the fashion kids because I thought they were a little crazy. So I started to kind of find my people and find my way. And people always look at me or my experience and they're like, Karuna, you've known what you wanted to do since you were 13. You have such a straight path. It's amazing, it's been so clean and clear. And I went to school for design, I became an intern, I became an assistant, then an associate, then a designer, then a senior designer, then a design director, then a head of design, then a VP of design, and then a chief product officer. Super clean, super easy, no problem, amazing. Except this is what it actually felt like. It just felt like total chaos all the time. And at each moment, at each transition, I was full of frustration, fear, rage, anger, delight, elation. It was like the most intense process. And at every moment, I had the same questions all the time. Why am I doing this? Is it worth it? Why is this so crazy? All I want to do is make clothes, right? So I started to find my way. And what finding my way felt like finding the light. It was like I just kept finding these corners of things that felt right. That was my food. That was what I wanted to munch on. And so I just kept contorting around whatever the other shit was to get more light. So I started off interning. I had the amazing opportunity to work for Alexander McQueen and Dolce & Gabbana, very high fashion. I was backstage. I was in the atelier, like sewing antique coins on ball gowns. It was amazing. And I loved that part. But I didn't care about the parties. I didn't care about like the coked up models or who was famous or like what I got an invite to. I just liked the making part, right? So that told me a lot right away. And the people who were like so hungry for those jobs, a lot of them wanted the party. So I started to kind of build some information to understand like a little bit of a decision matrix, who I was versus who maybe other people in the room were and what they wanted to do. At the same time, I got a scholarship from Old Navy, which obviously couldn't have been a more different experience. But the people there were so great. And I loved working with them. They're so chill and they felt like friends and we had a really positive working environment. But I didn't love the clothes that much. We had to cut corners all the time. We had to make the cheaper decision. It wasn't really product first, right? So all of that was information. All of that helped me continue to identify, where to go and how to get there. I moved on to Ralph Lauren. I then started my own line. And little by little, I tried a bunch of different things. And I kind of ended up trying to balance between high-end product that was really well made and product that was accessible, wearable, functional, that my family could afford. Now, I didn't know anything about the outdoor industry until like 10 years after this, when I went to OR for the first time, and I was like, these people seem like my people. But in New York, in fashion, I was figuring out that balance between heritage, functional utility, and price. And like, how do I find where I want to be in that? And everything was kind of leading to that the whole time. So I went through this period where I worked for 2 different large brands that had started elevated brands. First for Rule at Abercrombie and Fitch, and then for Martin & Osa at American Eagle. And this was my first time working for like really wealthy companies who were making tons of money and like sinking money into new brands. Now notice that these 2 elevated brands no longer exist. So, so you kind of know where the story is going, but it was an incredible experience because I got to see the world. I got to go to Peru, to India, to Hong Kong. I got to get into every factory of all of our vendors. And sometimes they would just pay the money to send me for 3 weeks at a time and stay in a hotel in Hong Kong until the line was done, until it was perfect. And we would just like get in a van and go back and forth between the factory. And I liked nothing more than being in factories, like that's where like my heart sang, that was my light, right? So I started to realize, okay, like this maker piece is really important, but also some other things started developing. I really loved having an idea and seeing it become real, having more ideas, having a concept underneath it, bringing out a sense of authenticity, seeing it on people on the street. All of a sudden these experiences started to build up and give me information about what was important to me and what I wanted to do. The other side of it was that I was super corporate and really culty. Working at Abercrombie in 2004 was like crazy. That music they have in the stores, if any of you guys, they played that music at work. And they didn't change the soundtrack for 30 days. So, and everybody loved it. And I was like, this is the Twilight Zone. This is insane. You weren't allowed to wear their brands, so I only wore vintage because I just didn't know what else to do, This was the process. And I ended up traveling so much that it kind of didn't matter. I was almost never even there. So I learned about that. I learned about presenting. I learned about politics. I learned about merchandising and merchants and how they think and commerciality and how all of your hopes and dreams can be ruined, and then how to convince them to believe in what you're doing. So these are all really important lessons. And when I got to kind of the next phase, I had learned something really, really important, which is the first advice slide. You guys ready for this? Okay. All right. Don't choose your job, choose your boss. The one thing I realized is that every time I was happy, it was because I was working for somebody who believed in me, believed in my talent, thought I was awesome, and I thought they were awesome and I respected them. And then anytime I was really unhappy was when I worked for somebody who thought I was a piece of shit or not talented or whatever, and I didn't respect them. Or sometimes it was uneven. Sometimes they thought my work was good, but I thought they were full of shit, right? And that didn't work either. So all of a sudden I realized, okay, I really, when I take a job, I gotta make sure I'm working for somebody and reporting to somebody that I respect, that I think knows what they're doing, that I can learn from. And when you work for somebody you learn from, it's so exciting. It's like when somebody just sits down and does something like a master and then tells you how you can figure out how to do it. There's nothing like that. It's so valuable, right? So I started to understand how rare that was and how important that was. Okay, so back to the story. So I get this opportunity. I get called by a recruiter and they say, we're looking for a head of design. I had just been a category designer at that point, so I'd never been able to own my own collection. Looking for a head of design. It's for an American heritage brand, check, in Italy, double check. And we need you to do a project for Monday. This was Saturday morning, 7 a.m. And I was like, okay, great, no problem. And that was Woolrich. And Woolrich, was an American heritage brand, started in 1830, but the Italians had taken it and really elevated it. So all of a sudden I was presented with this opportunity to kind of have all of the humility and function of this original, real, authentic brand, but take it to the next level, working in Italy, yes. Yes, amazing. And then I interviewed with the creative director, Andrea Canè, and I was like triple, quadruple yes. We bonded right away, we felt the vibe, he was so chill, he was so cool, he had amazing taste, he wore the right New Balance that I liked, because I wear those, So I moved to Italy. But there was another side to all of this, right? It's never that simple. And this is the other side of the light, is all of the shadows and all of the obstacles in between. So I get to Italy, it's amazing. I'm at a sales meeting in Portofino, sipping Prosecco. I'm like, how could anything be better than this? And then I got to the office in Bologna, and I was told that it was an English-speaking office, and I only had high school French, so I did not know how to speak Italian. I was like, okay, cool. Everyone speaks English in the office, great. That was a lie. So, ho imparato a parlare italiano subito. And to this day, I now speak fluent Italian because I had no choice. I never went to school. I literally had to figure out how to speak Italian to survive. And a shout out to Rocco and Selena, who none of you know, but they saved me because they were the only people who actually did speak English, so they translated for me. And I realized that there were a lot more obstacles there than I thought. So yes, dream job, yes, absolutely, but also a lot of other stuff that came with it. And this brings us to tree metaphor 2. Grow around the obstacles. And I love this picture because this tree has patiently and slowly just absorbed this stop sign. And this is all I ever heard. Stop, no, basta, impossibile, forget it. And I had to figure out how to survive there, how to thrive there. I knew that Andrea and I were on the same page. I knew what I wanted to do. And I had to figure out how to get there. I found out really quickly as well that nobody wanted me there. I was the first outsider that had been ever hired into that office in Bologna. Everybody was Italian. They were very territorial. And they were not happy that I was there. So like my team didn't want me there. My cross-functional partners didn't want me there. Like product development didn't like me. Everything I tried to do, it was like, people were totally talking shit about me constantly behind my back. But I didn't understand Italian, so it was fine, because I didn't know that they were doing it until later. And I was learning little by little, And so I had to figure out what to do with that. And ultimately, in that moment, I thought to myself, okay, I know what I want to make. I know it's the right thing to make. I was hired for a reason. I love what we're doing. I still love this job. I'm just going to focus on the product. I'm going to try to speak Italian. I'm going to try to be as nice as possible. But ultimately, I'm going to try to win these people over by just making something beautiful. And with Italians, that always works. And that's the wonderful thing, is that every Italian is born and bred to want to make beautiful things. So we figured that out. Little by little, I won them over. And Donatella was one of the best examples. Donatella Pedrazzi, she didn't speak any English, but she handled all of the Italian makers. And I found out after the first couple months that the tech packs I was giving her, she was putting in a drawer if she didn't like it and not passing on to the supplier. So she was like editing the design work, right? And then pretended she didn't know what I was talking about because she can't speak English. And she was like, she understood it, but she would not actually communicate. So little by little, I won her over. Like, I found this out. I kind of like approached it. We talked about why she didn't like it. We made a new thing. I had coffee with her. But she did have great taste, and she did know how to get things done. And little by little, Donatella became like my greatest ally. She became my best friend. Like, we're still Facebook friends. We talk about the kids. And she, after 18 months, she went to bat for me on everything. I earned her trust. She believed that it was about the product, not about me, that I wasn't an imposter, and that's how long it took. Same thing with Giulio. Giulio was head of product development. Everything was a no, everything was a bad idea, impossible. And after 18 months, I think that's how long it took for people to really see the collection, to go through the process, to see what came out, to know that when you say something and then you do it, you're not full of shit, to know that you have integrity, to know that you care, that you're a kind person. All of those things take about 18 months. And I found that amount of time was true for almost every job I had after that too. So 18 months later, I was backstage, and this was the moment where I was like, okay, we're all okay. Giulio, who didn't like anything the whole time, we were looking at the collection, we were doing like a runway presentation, we were backstage, and he says, "Karuna, this collection is beautiful. I understand you now." And after that, it was like, Giulio was my best friend too. So, we got there, and that was the first moment where I felt really proud of making a whole thing, not just a garment or a t-shirt or a concept or a category, but it was like there was one collection in particular where everything came together, and it was what you guys were just talking about up here. It was like that feeling of rightness, that feeling that like it didn't matter what I had intended or what we had tried to make, it was supposed to be. These were objects that were meant to exist, and then we saw them come to life. And that feeling was so powerful that like there was no turning back after that. No matter how many times I doubted things in the future, I knew that like I wasn't gonna do anything else but this, because that feeling was like, it was almost like an addiction in a positive way. So at that point I was like, okay, the light has evolved. I know not only do I wanna make things, but I wanna make things of quality. I wanna make things that have purpose. I want to make things that work, and I want to make things that people keep for a long time. So that's where I got to that point. I felt really good. It was amazing. And then there was just one problem. I had very inconveniently fallen in love with a man in New York, not in Italy. So I knew I didn't want to build my life in Italy. He definitely wasn't moving to Italy. I kind of missed New York. So I started this process of kind of living between the two places, going back and forth. I wanted to get married and buy a house and and we started to build a life together and screw up my perfect Italian dream. We're still married, so it worked out. But I want to pause here because during all of this, there was one subject that came up in all of my decisions that's hard to talk about, but very important to talk about, which is money. So we're just going to talk about money for a minute because it's pretty simple from my perspective. I don't care about money for money's sake at all, but I love money. And I love money because money lets me make a bunch of shit that I want to make, right? So money is a means to an end from my point of view. Money is a material. And when I started to acknowledge that and think about money as a material, not as something that I needed or was supposed to have or represented a goal, but something that actually I just needed to have to do the things I wanted. And if I knew what I wanted, I could just figure out how much I needed, and then I could just get that, and then I could just do the things I wanted. That changed my relationship with money completely, and all of my decisions from then on, in job negotiations and everything, became a lot simpler. If you don't have enough money, it sucks. And I don't recommend it. Anyone in this room who's been there knows that feeling, and it's a terrible feeling, and it interferes with your creativity, and it interferes with growing towards your light. But if you have too much money, it's the same fucking thing. It also sucks. You become a different person. Your whole life starts to be led by something that's not important to you, and I've seen how it destroys people. So I've spent a lot of time actually figuring out what's that range? Like, what's the minimum I need to not be totally preoccupied with having money or just paying the rent? And then what's the point at which it becomes a burden or it becomes a distortion? And what I realized is that range is not that big and it's totally doable. And that was an incredibly liberating process for me to get to that point, to make those decisions, to find those numbers. And those are personal numbers. My numbers are not your numbers. But I really, really recommend taking the time to think about that and figure that out as you grow and change at whatever phase in your life. Because then you don't have to waste your time with it. All right, so I'm moving back to New York. I had this amazing experience. I'm learning more about what I want to do. And I met two people who became the most challenging people that I had ever met, who really changed my life. And that's Solomon and that's Siddhartha. Yes, they are destroyers of worlds. They are very cute. They're amazing. They are my heart and my love. They also took 18 months to make, combined, just as a parallel. But yeah, so I fell in love. I bought a house. I had a family, right? All those things were good things. But the minute I had children, literally my whole world turned upside down. All of a sudden, all the things that made me really successful, I couldn't do any of them anymore. Like before kids, I did whatever it took. I pulled it out, I got on a plane, I was like, I made it beautiful, whatever it took, I made it happen. And I kind of did it by myself in a way. Like even if I was part of a team, I was a little bit self-obsessed about it. Like I had the vision, I was gonna do it, I was gonna make it happen. I really didn't understand what it was to actually lean on anybody else, ask for help. I had been so independent my whole life, and everything came crashing down. I couldn't do anything at night anymore. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I couldn't do the extra hours that I had never realized I was working because I loved my work, right? So I just did it all the time. And it pulled me out of myself. I felt completely confused. I felt destitute. I felt like I didn't know how to access joy or inspiration. I felt like a fraud. I felt like an imposter. It was tough. Maybe some of that was hormonal, possibly. But it was a really, really important moment because it was the moment that I went to this very dark, difficult space and had to completely change. And that change took me to this. Tree metaphor number 3, develop your root system. So I needed so much help. And I learned to ask for that help. And trees are so amazing because, you have the overstory and you have the understory. And in the understory, you have this incredible exchange. For so many years, people thought trees were competing for light. And then what they learned is that trees were feeding nutrients to each other through the mycelial networks in their roots, right? How perfect. That's how it felt. It was like I had to root down during that time. I had to ask for help. I had to say I couldn't do it. I had to cultivate creativity in my team. I had to let go. And all of these things not only became critical to getting through that period, but became foundational to then what I became. I started to realize the beauty of that. That, if it was just my idea leading a team, maybe that idea actually wasn't as good as I thought it was. And when the team stepped up and the team contributed and we had a real exchange, the ideas were better. So letting go allowed space for other people to become part of that foundation. And that actually helped me grow taller, higher, broader. Okay, so I'm figuring this out. The light is changing. I'm making great product that's long-lasting, that's beautiful, that's worth the money, that people wear for their whole lives. And I'm doing it with people that I respect. I'm giving them space to contribute. I'm learning how to be a manager. I'm cultivating creativity. And taking a step back and working differently. I also have a family that I love, that I'm in love with, and all of these things start to enrich my life, change what that light feels like. What am I reaching for? What am I growing towards? It didn't mean that there weren't obstacles, but it changed the landscape. And it was around that time that I got this opportunity to move to Canada for a new job. And one of the things that had happened during that time that, actually after listening to all the other people at this conference, I realized I needed to talk about was that there were a lot of dark periods where I doubted everything again. I knew the work I wanted to do, but again, I was really disappointed in the leadership at the time. I made it to vice president, and I didn't feel like I had a seat at the table at all. I was really frustrated, and at times I felt like a caged animal. I felt that kind of rage, that kind of frustration. Again, could have been hormonal, possibly, but it was real because I had that need to create. I knew what I wanted to make, what I wanted to do, and there are all these things getting in the way, even after I learned how to work collaboratively. And I made a decision during that time, and I made a decision that no matter what happened, I would do what I thought was right. And I thought it through. I was like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? I'm gonna get fired. I can get another job. I can move in with my parents. Like, we can move back to Chicago. I can move in with my sister in Boston, who's a really big house and lots of rooms. And I just decided that I wasn't gonna worry about it. I was just gonna do what I thought was right. And if somebody was gonna fire me, like, fine, I don't care. So I just started doing that, and I've been doing that ever since, and I still feel that way. And that was a really important turning point for me, to commit that to myself. And to say that, like, if it all falls apart, as long as I feel like I was living with integrity, doing the things I believe in, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. And that changed the trajectory. So I get this job offer in Canada, and my husband's family was in Canada, in Toronto. So it all kind of lined up. And it was with Canada Goose. And so they checked a lot of boxes for me, like high quality, functional. I went there, I met these incredible female leaders there. When I interviewed, I walked the factory floor, which was right under the design studio, and I was like, yes, please, this is my kind of joint. I had also become really obsessed with domestic manufacturing in Italy, and then with Woolrich in the US. So the fact that they were investing so heavily in that they were just charging the price that you needed to pay to have that quality, it really appealed to me. Also, Trump had just been elected, so there was that. So we moved to Canada, and I had another 18 months of like incredible growth, a lot of change, figuring out how to work around obstacles, deal with this new environment, win the trust of my team. A lot of those themes repeated during that time, and we made a lot of incredible product, and I was really proud of a lot of the things we did. And at the same time, I started to realize that I was feeling a little boxed in. I kept hearing feedback like, Karuna, you need to learn how to stay in your lane. And you know what? They were right. I didn't want to stay in my lane. I wanted to elbow everybody out. I wanted to tell marketing what to do. I was merchandising, that doesn't make any sense. That's not a good business plan, I had all these opinions. And it wasn't, frankly, maybe not that appropriate in my role as VP of Design to have all those opinions and expect people to do what I want them to do. So long story short, I realized that even though that job was really working in a lot of ways, and I was happy there, I did know that I wanted to grow a little broader. I wanted my canopy to kind of move out. And I had been working with materials teams and sourcing teams and merchandising teams for 20 years at that point, and I knew how to do that work, and I understood those jobs because I had to be a good designer. And this is the critical part of, I think, the lack of understanding and the lack of people moving into design leadership or C-level leadership from design. We all know that there's a significant lack of females in the C-suite. If you take away women who started their own companies and that's why their CEOs are counted in the C-suite, it's even a smaller percentage. And then if you look at that small percentage and you look at women who came up through a creative, that's not even measured because it's minuscule. I don't even know, I might be the only CPO who started as a design intern in the world, or there might be 3 others, I don't know. After this, maybe I'll go find them and try to figure that out. But I was kind of tired of it, you know? I was like, I know how to do this. And why can merchandising own design, but design can't own merchandising? Like, why? So I was having all those feelings and being quiet about it and political and doing the right thing and like supporting my team. And I was approached by Roots. Okay, so obviously the name, first of all, like, yes. But Roots was a Canadian brand that's about to turn 50, and I'd known about them for a while. I knew a few people there, and they were kind of this funny like conglomeration of all the things I had done beforehand. They had their own leather factory. That's where the whole brand started, in Toronto, which was a really cool place. They made tons of like sweatpants and sweatshirts, Abercrombie and Fitch, American Eagle. They had, the buffalo plaid, Woolrich. They were heritage outdoor. So there are all these kind of pieces. But I just wasn't sure about what was going on at the company at the time, the leadership. And they basically cleaned out their whole C-suite. They had gone public, and they'd been founder-led until then. The founders were really, and are really inspiring leaders. So they were trying to find their way, trying to figure out the new leadership. And the interim CEO at the time, Megan Roach, asked to speak with me, and we talked about it. They were looking for a new chief merchandising officer. So we sit down, we have a conversation, and it was like the best conversation I had ever had. I didn't expect it at all. I came into the room not needing a job, and having made that commitment to myself during like that dark time. So I was just completely honest with her. I was like, this is who I am. This is what you'll get. These are the things I'm good at. These are the things I'm bad at. I'm totally no bullshit. I want to make great things. I don't want to deal with politics. I just want to be in a room with people who are willing to be honest and have integrity and work together to make something great. That's all I want to do. And she was like, that sounds great. That sounds great. That's what we're going to do. We changed the title from Chief Merchandising Officer to Chief Product Officer, and the rest is history. I now am working there with that group of people, and they haven't let me down at all. It's like the most amazing experience that I never thought would happen, which leads me to my final advice slide. So you can't always do this. It's not always that easy. But anytime you get a chance to do this, please do it. Because really, it's so much better. And even when we're thinking about like collaboration partners or hiring, this is literally my filter. This is like my hiring filter at this point. I want to work with cool people I respect. Like, that's it. And I respect them because they're amazing at their job. They have a strategic mind. They're kind people who have deep values. There's a lot behind that. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Now that I'm at Roots, I'm spending very little energy on politics. We talk about really hard things. We don't always have the answer, but I'm literally have a seat at the table with an executive team that's willing to be vulnerable, that has a hard conversation, whose opinions I respect. And that's the first time I've ever seen that or experienced that. And it gives me so much hope.
How do you have a plan for sharing this with people less fortunate than yourselves or us? Have you thought about that? Because I think all your slides were so good. It was so inspiring for me. And I was I think there's a whole generation of people that could benefit from that story. And I feel like I'd put it back to you, how can you share that with as many people as possible? It's such a cool story.
I was going to post it on LinkedIn when I get the video.
That'll do it.
Is that okay? I don't know.
No, I think it's a great story.
Thank you.
Really, truly.
Yeah.
So, Karuna, yesterday you were talking to me and Bob about like how much you love the CEO that you work with.
Yeah.
And it's another woman. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you feel like how many women are in the C-suite at Roots? Is it just the two of you?
3. There are 3 C-suite and they're all
do you
women.
think that contributes to like the fact that you can be vulnerable, you know, in your C-suite meetings?
Yeah, so Megan and Mona, Megan's the CEO, Mona's the CFO. And like, it's like 3 badass moms running the show. And I feel that. And it's like, nobody has time for any mess. You know what I'm saying? Like, we are like straight. And we get down to business and we get it done and we work together. And I think there is like a female space to that. But I've also met men who can be part of that, like Caleb, who heads up general counsel and is our SVP of legal and compliance. He's an amazing ally. He is like at the table with us in that same spirit. And I just think it's rare, but that's exactly what's gonna change and needs to change. And I have a lot of space for that. I also realize that we have a sameness about us, and that can also be a weakness. Like, I've had those moments where I'm like, oh, so maybe I'm just happy because I'm like at the table with people exactly like me. Like, that's not necessarily cool either, right? So I have an awareness of that, and I'm just learning. I'm just learning about it.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. I think it's really cool that there's, you know, room for more than one woman at the table.
Yeah, for sure.
Do not give me the mic.
No tactical questions? I thought people would have more nitty-gritty questions.
Actually, I do.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated. When I was at Nike, Mark Parker was the CEO, and he came up through design. And actually, I worked for one of my favorite bosses of all time was Mindy Grossman, who's now at Weight Watchers. But like, she was a New York Armento who came into Nike and like actually knew how to make clothes. And same thing. Like, here's what I want to do. I want beauty, and I don't want bullshit, and I don't want politics. So my question is, as a creative, I've never been able to really figure out the politics part of it. How do you navigate that? Can you talk about how you do that? Because it's tough, right? It's not. You're not trained as a designer to deal with politics.
I don't know how good I am at it, because like I ended up here, and I don't really have time for it. I do think empathy is an important part of it. So there have been people I work with who I don't like, and I think they're jerks. And then I realize that they have chronic pain, or like they're going through some really deep, terrible shit. And I like try to leave room for that and space for that. And there's some people that like I've had a transformative experience with, where when I leave it space, or I stop being so defensive and be like, I don't like that person, and I don't like their attitude, it changes. So I do think that is something. I did learn to like not say every fucking thing that on my mind, which took me a while. Because that definitely didn't get me where I wanted to get to. But I also like feel strongly about speaking truth, and I'm willing to be fired to do that as well. Yeah. So it was more like I shut up about the shit that's not important, and I talk about the things that are. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm curious, I'm always curious about everything you think, but what role does like ego play in getting to that seat at the table? You know, like we're going back to kind of what we were talking about, like business as usual and playing by the rules and the game and working all the different metrics. You know, like, do you have to show up with that gravitas and that bravado and like own and take ownership of that part of it, or can you show up as your true self, or maybe that is part of it, you know, like what's that duality like?
Yeah, I think yes, and yes. So I would make the distinction, this is semantic, but I would make the distinction between confidence and ego. I don't need any ego, I need a lot of confidence. But I'm not gonna come up and be confident when I don't know what I'm talking about. Like that's another thing, and this might be working with women, or it might just be the women I'm working with, but there's a lot of space to just say, I don't know what that acronym is. What is like MCS mean? Like everyone's like, oh, let's get the IMO on the GMD. You know, and you're like, I don't know what the acronym. What is that acronym? So there's kind of a rule with us that like we just ask the question, and there's a lot of space for people to be like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And what they've really taught me is that you're never going to get anywhere by pretending you know something or feeling like an imposter. Like that's something we all experience. But the people, especially who come from a business background, like Megan's from venture capital, Mona's straight finance. Like they're really aggressive about filling in the holes. That's something that they will ask the question every time. So I think it's important to be confident authentically in terms of knowing what you know and being willing to step up and be the expert when you are, and then ask for help and become an expert as quickly as possible and do that totally transparently.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably wouldn't be there unless you started as that design intern and cut your teeth in the factory, on the floor, pushing bolts around. Like, you had to go through that whole process of experience to get there. And I know that, like, that's not the way that kids want to do it now. It's like we want to fast track. My sister's like 28 and she wants to be a CMO. And I was like, why do you think you need to be a CMO? Like, why are you entitled to that?
Yeah, I mean, you can be a CMO at 14 at this point, but like doesn't mean you're going to be any good or you're going to learn anything, And that's the difference. I mean, I work with people all the time who think they know more than they do, and like I just show them that they don't know what they're talking about, and I try to do it in a very nice way. But like I'm pulling no punches because the facts are the facts. I don't have to be a bitch about it, but I can be like, so what's the answer to that? So why is that? And what's that based on? And you just ask a million questions, and they're like, and then like it comes out. And then the people who are willing to be brave enough to own that and be like, okay, I fucked up, help me. Those are the people that then I invest time in and I mentor. And the people who like can't even hear about it, they get fired. Sorry,
How there's a big difference between people who want to be something and people who want to do something?
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, if you're guided by, like sees like in this, I think if you're guided by like that deep desire to actually do the work, and you love the work, like you feel it so fast. It's really not that hard to tell the difference, especially in like any creative space. Yeah. All right, thanks you guys.